Hello, hope you're doing well. Before we dive into this video, let me explain the premise real quick. Today I wanted to have another go at a fun little challenge that I've actually done once or twice before here on the channel, an art style challenge. I've already tried drawing in the styles of a bunch of different anime and cartoons, and even the styles of some other YouTube artists. But this time around, I really wanted to try my hand at the art styles of some of my favorite manga series. In particular, some manga that I think are just way underappreciated, and that I have really just been wanting an excuse to ramble about for the longest time, so this is me finding that excuse, finally. As per usual with these kind of challenges, I'm not going to be drawing any of the actual characters from these stories because I don't want to just draw a direct copy of them, that's not quite the point. Instead, I'm going to be using the very familiar design of my channel avatar here and just translating it into these various styles. That way, I get to properly study what makes these art styles tick as I'm drawing them, and you guys can hopefully see a bit more clearly the difference that certain design variations can make even when drawing the same character over and over. Anyway, with that in mind, let's get right into it. Alrighty, so like I said, this video is going to be partly about the artwork and partly just about these manga that I really want to recommend to y'all. And first up to the plate is one called Blue Period. Out of all the manga that you're going to see me referencing here today, Blue Period probably has the most unique art style of the bunch. You know what, saying it now, it honestly might even have the most unique art style of any manga that I've ever read. Blue Period is a story about a guy who is making his way through life without any real passion, until he gets inspired by a classmate's artwork and decides to go and learn oil painting from scratch to try and get into art school. It has a bunch of legitimately really good art advice bundled up into the story and touches on some really interesting themes of self-discovery and inspiration, and even explores a bit of an LGBT identity storyline via one of the side characters who I enjoy very much. It plays around a lot with very artistic representations of the different characters' emotions as the story goes on. As far as I know, the chapters update monthly, so they're quite long, which is really nice, and I always look forward to the new updates. It's also recently started being published in English, so I picked up the first volume for myself a little while ago, and it actually came in really handy as a point of reference for this drawing. I find the art style of Blue Period really enchanting, because even though it's drawn in the traditional black and white manga medium, the art itself has a kind of abstract, painterly feeling to it that matches the plot of the story. It's really unusual, and I really love it. I'm pretty sure the majority of the manga I'm looking at today are drawn traditionally with pen on paper, but because I'm a primarily digital artist, I decided to not do that. Normally I use Paint Tool SAI version 2 for character illustrations like this, but because I wanted to match that authentic black and white manga aesthetic this time around, I decided to use Clip Studio instead. If you've already seen my recent video walking through all of the features of Clip Studio, then you'll already know how much fun I've been having getting to grips with it lately, so I was very happy to be able to use it again for this video. Like I was saying anyway, the art style in this manga is very painterly and abstract, and that comes through in both the anatomy of the characters themselves and in the way that they're inked. I messed around with the pen settings in Clip Studio until I managed to land on a pen pressure that had the same kind of varying thickness that the inks in Blue Period do. Because it's a story about painting, a lot of the panels and cover art also feature the characters posing with their preferred art tools. So I tried to do something similar here with the pose for my little character by drawing him holding a tablet pen. I used the main character of Blue Period as my main point of reference, since the way that the artist of this manga draws short hair is very particular, and he was the best example I could find for that. I tried my best to eyeball the way that the artist draws clothing folds as well and mimic them while drawing the outfit. The way they go about doing the noses and eyes and general facial structure all adds up to be very unique as well, so that was fun to try and replicate. Also, another feature of Blue Period's art style that I really like is that instead of the solid grey or polka dot screen tones that you usually get in most manga, a lot of the time the artist tends to use a grey watercolor kind of pattern instead. Again, it's just another kind of little design choice that reflects the subject of the story, and it really helps it stand out from the norm in terms of the visuals. For me, I think the most standout part of the drawing process on this one would have to be either the face or the hands. Trying to sketch and ink them felt really different from the way I normally work, since, you know, I'm so used to doing anatomy in a certain way, like I have my own set of bodily building blocks ingrained in my brain that I kind of start assembling on autopilot whenever I draw. I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully you know what I mean. But drawing this anyway, I had to kind of try and force myself to use much looser, flowier shapes than I usually would, and think in a completely different way. And that was really interesting to try out. It definitely felt different, for sure. Anyway, that's this first drawing just about done, so let's hop on over to the next one. The next manga I want to talk about today is, funnily enough, another one with blue in the title. This one is an absolute all-time favorite of mine, and it is called Blue Flag. This manga is among a very select number of comics that I would not hesitate to call a masterpiece. As far as the plot is concerned, it's basically a slice-of-life story about a group of friends in a love quadrangle. It's made up of 2 boys and 2 girls, except, surprise, it's gay. One of the guys is in love with the other guy, and one of the girls is in love with the other girl, but the objects of their affections don't actually know, and they think that everybody's crushes are going in completely different directions. This story was published monthly by Shonen Jump, but it touches on so many subjects that you just don't normally get to see in shonen stories. Being in the closet, coming out, even a whole plot with one of the side characters, dealing with the very specific struggle of trying to have platonic male friends when you're a girl. It's finished now, but myself and a friend of mine were following this manga chapter by chapter as it came out, and let me tell you, the amount of times this manga made us cry, the amount of times it left us speechless, the amount of times it made us say, no, the chapter can't end there, I need to know what happens next. It's really good at cliffhangers and just leaving you wanting more. If I remember correctly, there were even 1 or 2 chapters where there was basically no dialogue at all, like none of the characters talked, and it still managed to have me on the edge of my seat the entire time. Honestly, as far as the story goes, it is complicated and delicately crafted and just amazingly paced. I love it very, very much, and I can't recommend it enough. And as far as the art goes, it's also absolutely amazing in that department. The drawings in Blue Flag can be anything from beautiful and detailed and near realistic to just really simplistic and goofy and cute, depending on the mood that it's trying to get across. When it came down to trying to mimic that art style for this drawing, I decided to make things hard for myself, because of course I did, and go for the much more detailed option. Unlike Blue Period, the characters in Blue Flag tend to have much more realistically proportioned anatomy and facial features, and the ink usually has a lot less variation in line thickness. So I used the pencil tool to rough out a sketch, and then I adjusted the pen tool to have more of a fine liner kind of feeling, which was interesting to try out since I'm used to using pens that are a bit more on the thick side by comparison. As with the last drawing though, I did use a custom brush to quickly fill in the cable knitted pattern on the cardigan here, because that's just one bit of detail that I couldn't be bothered to draw 6 times over. Like I said before, Blue Flag is a slice of life story. It's not got anything fantastical or magical going on, so for the pose on this one I decided to just do a casual standing pose. But as an added detail, I did decide to include a mobile phone, because the characters in Blue Flag can be seen texting each other a lot. You should hopefully be able to see here as well that I added a little fish keychain to the phone, and the reason for that is because that little keychain is kind of like a key item that pops up in the story as well, so I just thought it'd be cute to feature it in this drawing. This drawing was also the first one out of this batch where I really had to start thinking about how I needed to do the shading. If you read a lot of manga, you'll know that, like, some artists prefer to just use cross-hatching for their shading, like in Naruto, and some prefer to use screen tones, like in more of the shoujo stuff. And this artist, the artist of Blue Flag, falls into the third category where they kind of mix and match and use both. This is also another series where the volumes have begun being released in English, so I actually had a few of the books on my shelf to use as a reference for this one. And while I was flipping through them, I noticed that there's like a very light layer of grey screen tone applied around the edges of some of the more detailed drawings to give them just a bit more definition. That was probably one of the more standout features of this art style for me, since I'm more used to using solid shadows when I draw in black and white, rather than taking the time to add so much fine detail with screen tones and hatching and everything. The way that the artist of Blue Flag draws eyes is also way more detailed than the way I've gotten used to drawing them in my own work, but it's always been one of my favourite parts of their art style. All the little nooks and crannies really give them a good feeling of depth. For the darker areas, like the shirt and the hair, well, the previous drawing was the only one that needed to have an unusual texture, so I just used ordinary grey screen tones for those bits this time around. Overall, I'm real happy with how this one turned out. I think it fits the vibe of Blue Flag pretty well, and yeah, again, if you haven't read this series before, then please do. Treat yourself, you know. Like I said before, it's really good, and I just can't recommend it enough. Anyway, that's one more drawing down, so let's move on to the next one. Now, would you believe me if I told you that I managed to get not one, not two, but 3 different manga into this mix with titles beginning with the word blue? Well, believe it or not, that is exactly what's happening. This next manga is called Blue Lock, and it is all about football. Or soccer for you Americans, I guess, because you got weird names for things. But don't panic, I haven't hit my head and suddenly gained a liking for sport or anything. No, I actually originally found this manga kind of by accident, and I just ended up really enjoying it. Normally, I don't really go for sports manga in general, you know, high-Q stans don't at me, but they're just not really my kind of thing. So yeah, the way I ended up coming across Blue Lock wasn't because I was looking to give the sport genre a try for once. Instead, it was actually because I had been reading one of the author's previous works, which was a kind of sci-fi survival horror manga called Dolly Kill Kill. I don't remember a lot about that one because it's been ages since I read it. I just remember it had an interesting premise. But I do know that I wouldn't really recommend it for everybody because it was quite gory, and as much as I did enjoy it, it did feel like it ended quite abruptly, so it was kind of unsatisfying. When I finished reading that old series though, I decided to look up the author and see what else they might be working on. And I was really surprised to find out that they were making a story about football, of all things. Because, like I say, the last work I read from them was this, like, violent horror show, so it seemed like a pretty big change of direction. However, it's because the author is so well versed in telling dark survival horror stories that I actually ended up finding Blue Lock really interesting, where a lot of other sports manga have left me feeling bored. Because Blue Lock isn't your typical power of friendship fueled sports manga. Instead, it's a story about 300 strikers locked in a training facility together trying to become the best in Japan by one-upping each other and screwing over their teammates. It basically takes all the tropes you would expect to find in a typical shonen story and flips them on their head entirely. And I'm trying to keep this video as spoiler-free as possible, so I'll just say that if you are a fan of sports manga and you are familiar with all of the kind of story beats and character types that you'd usually expect to find in a sports manga, then you'll only need to read the first 2 chapters of Blue Lock to understand what I'm talking about. Besides having a really interesting story anyway, Blue Lock also has a really unique art style. There's a lot of cross-hatching and heavier use of ink, and absolutely tons of really dynamic poses in all of the football scenes. The artist also has a thing they do whenever the characters are really in the zone, where they'll paint a bunch of watercolor lines around them to kind of show that they're giving off a powerful aura or that they're about to use a special move or something. That detail in particular was really cool to see when I was reading Blue Lock for the first time, because it was actually a technique that they used in their artwork for Dolly Kill Kill as well. So, I don't know, it was just really neat to see that kind of signature painting technique carrying through to their new story. For my adaptation of this art style anyway, I wanted to make sure that I included all of those key elements. So I decided to take a bit of artistic liberty and make believe that even a fictional representation of myself like this could ever have the coordination necessary to kick a football. Like I said before, the dynamic action poses are a real staple for any sports manga like this, so I knew I kind of had to have a go at drawing one. I had to pull up a lot of screenshots from the manga to get the anatomy and clothing folds right, but it made for a fun challenge. For the inking, I readjusted the pen tool to a bit of a bigger thickness and found a watercolor brush to do the power effect around the edges of the character with. I drew the crosshatch shadows on a new layer and used the magic wand tool to select and delete any of it that went outside the lines. When it comes to doing line-based shading like this, especially for a pose that has such big movement behind it, it really helps to keep the majority of your lines flowing in the same direction as that movement. For the finer details, I tried to mimic the big eyes that a lot of the characters in Blue Lock have, and tried to add a little burst effect at the point of impact where the football was kicked from. As for the football itself, I could not for the life of me figure out how the pattern was supposed to look because, again, I don't know anything about sports, so I ended up pulling up a reference for it and filling that in after I'd stopped recording. All things considered, I think all the pieces came together pretty well, and all in all, I had a lot of fun drawing something so energetic. Let's keep that energy going by moving right along to the next one. The next manga I wanted to draw from today is another all-time favourite of mine, and in fact another one that I would at least personally rank as an absolute masterpiece. This one is called Shiori Experience, and it is the story of a secondary school English teacher who gets possessed by the ghost of Jimi Hendrix under the condition that she has to become a music legend within a year, otherwise there are going to be some dire consequences. I know it sounds a bit goofy, but ultimately it's a story that is about pursuing your passions and failing and getting back up again, and it's the kind of story that will leave you breathless while reading it, especially if you yourself have ever been really passionate about something in the way that all of the main characters are passionate about music. The reason that I love Shiori Experience so much is that, besides the fact that the story is legitimately just really good, it's also expressed really well through the drawings that it's made up of. Bearing in mind the fact that, it's a comic, it's a silent medium, Shiori Experience has got hands down some of the best visual representation of sound and music and the emotions that they bring forth in people that I've ever seen in any format. Once or twice there have even been entire chapters where, kind of like I said about Blue Flag, there's just no dialogue at all, except in Shiori Experience's case, that's because the whole chapter is set to the lyrics of actual songs from real life that you can, pull up and listen to while you read the chapter. It's such a unique experience, mostly because I've never read another comic that comes with a soundtrack. It's not currently published in English, and unfortunately I doubt that it ever will be, if only because the licensing overseas would probably be a nightmare considering all of the big-name music stuff involved in the plot. But there are a handful of places to read it online, there are a couple of groups scanning it and translating it, and I would really recommend checking it out because, again, I can't speak highly enough of it as a series. It's really good and it will really suck you in when you start reading it. In terms of the visual style anyway, the artwork in Shiori Experience feels, like it's more on the angular side. I don't know, it's kind of hard to articulate because the characters don't feel stiff in any way. In fact, they're always really expressive and dynamic, but it's kind of like the hand that drew the lines that make up those characters took a very purposeful route across the paper, and that ended up giving them this really unique, very clean and sharp and, yeah, angular kind of appearance. I don't know how else to word it. And again, just to be completely clear, I love this art style, don't get me wrong, it's just very hard to put into words. Another thing that's hard about trying to draw in this art style is the fact that, much like with the other drawings I've done so far today, I really wanted to draw a pose that suited the manga I was drawing from. But let me tell you something, trying to draw a character playing a musical instrument is so difficult. I ended up having to heavily reference a pose from the manga itself while doing the sketch for this one because I just couldn't figure out how the hands needed to be placed. And because I do actually play guitar in real life, I thought it would be nice to draw my little character here playing my actual guitar that I own in real life. A design choice that meant that I ended up having to drag my guitar over to my work desk and precariously prop it up so that I could look at it while I was drawing. It was really helpful having a real-life object to reference while I was drawing. I don't normally get the chance to do that. But I do think that the next time I try that method, I'll probably use it to reference something a bit smaller and less awkward to move around than a full-size acoustic guitar. For the detail work, I paid close attention to the facial features of the characters in Shiori Experience to try and better match the mouth shapes and more rectangular eyes that they tend to have. And for the shading on the jeans, I marked off the areas of shadow with a pen before filling them in with a gradient. To make the guitar look nice and shiny, I just erased some of the areas of black and added a bit of white hatching. Altogether, this one took the longest time to draw out of any of these, and it's 100% because of that goddamn guitar. But I think the time I put into it was absolutely worth it because I am really proud of how this one turned out, however difficult it may have been to get it done. I didn't know going into this one whether I was actually going to be able to match the Shiori Experience art style, since, like I said, it is very unique. But yeah, I think I had a pretty decent go at it here, if nothing else. With that anyway, let's jump on ahead to the next drawing. Alrighty, now we're on the second to last one here, and it's actually a wee bit different from the rest, because this is a manga made in America. Its name is Apple Black, and it's the story of a young sorcerer with a magical left arm who's trying to solve the mystery behind his father's death. It reads Western style, left to right, and there are currently 2 completed volumes available to buy online, with new chapters released one by one through an anthology app called Saturday AM. The artist behind Apple Black is actually a guy who you can find right here on YouTube under the name White Manga. He has a bunch of really helpful art tutorials over on his channel, as well as insight into the production process of making manga. So I definitely recommend checking out his stuff if it sounds like the kind of thing that you'd enjoy. Now, truth be told, I actually didn't know if I would have time to include Apple Black in this video at first. I have quite a long list of faves when it comes to manga, and I already had to whittle it down quite a lot to even get to this many. But I really wanted to include it here because White and the rest of the Saturday AM team are doing some really cool work to properly shake up the standards of manga publishing and bring more diverse stories and characters into the world. And you know what, if the first 2 volumes of Apple Black are anything to go by, they're already doing a pretty good job of it and making it look pretty dang good while they do. So, you know, props for that. But yeah, honestly, that kind of ethos of bringing new voices onto the main stage is something that, like, you know, creative to creative, I really, really respect, and I'm always really excited to see what kind of stuff they have coming up next. Anyway, in terms of what's coming up on screen right now, I ended up giving this one a pretty default standing pose, except for the fact that I decided to have the arm crossing in front of the body like that, which made it a fair bit trickier to get right, I'm not gonna lie. There was no particular reason for that choice. It's not like it's a common pose in the series or anything. It's just that, yeah, I am nothing if not constantly out here making things harder for myself at every turn, I suppose. For the prop, I decided to have him holding a tablet pen again, like in the drawing I did earlier for Blue Period. Obviously though, Apple Black is not a story about drawing, so the reason for that choice was slightly different. You see, in Apple Black, all of the sorcerer characters have these magical items called wands that can do various things depending on what they are and who wields them. And to the best of my knowledge, White said that a wand could be pretty much anything. For example, one of my favourite characters from Apple Black has a cigarette as his wand, and he can make, like, smoke clones with it and spread poison gas around, stuff like that. So yeah, I thought it might be cool to have the wand in this case be basically just a tablet pen that can spread ink around in a similar way to that and do some cool stuff with it. Maybe it's like a penny crayon kind of thing, I don't know. In terms of the art style, Apple Black has, at least in my opinion, a really classic shonen manga kind of look when it comes to the way that the characters are drawn. I'm not entirely sure why. It might be the anatomy, the hatched shading, the facial features. Well, actually thinking about it, it's probably the combination of all of those things, but you know what I mean. There's just something about it that makes it very satisfying to look at. To try and emulate that feeling, I dialed my pen tool back to a more free-flowing, varying thickness kind of pressure setting, and grabbed the first volume of Apple Black off my shelf to use as a reference. And I realize this is probably going to sound weird before I even say it, but the very specific thing that I had the hardest time finding a reference for while drawing this was the crotch of the jeans. It turns out that a lot of the characters in Apple Black wear like tunics and tabards and cloaks that go halfway down their legs. So I ended up flicking through the pages like, okay, we're gonna be flying blind on this one, boys. Anyway, yeah, the short version of what I was trying to say there is that I did end up improvising a little bit when it came to the seams and folds on the clothes and stuff. I did manage to find a really good panel to reference for the shoes though, so I think I got the shape of them pretty okay at least. And as a handy shortcut, I also managed to find a custom brush in Clip Studio that I was able to use to draw the big splash of ink coming out of the pen, so that was nice and easy to do as well. All in all, I think my favourite part of this one to draw was probably the face. Like I said before, there's just something about this art style that makes it really satisfying to look at, so needless to say, it also felt really nice to draw it and see all of the features coming together. I also think it's probably the individual part that I managed to get closest to the actual overall Apple Black art style. White, mate, if you ever see this, just let me know if I've completely butchered your art style or not, yeah? That's this one all done anyway, so let's move along to the final drawing for today. So, here we are. Last but by no means least, we are going to be taking a look at Radiant. One of my absolute favourite series at the moment. It is released by Viz Media, who also publish Shonen Jump, and I've actually seen it referred to as a manfra because it's made by a French author named Tony Valente. Valente? I can't speak French. Moving on. Radiant is a story about wizards who gain their magic powers after being infected by monsters called Nemesis, and the main character is on a quest to find those monsters' nest and destroy it. There's a bunch of different arcs and stuff happening on the way to that goal, of course, but as far as the story is concerned, Radiant has a really unique tone when it comes to telling that story, compared to most mainstream manga anyway. And that probably comes down to the fact that, like I said a second ago, it's made by an author who isn't from Japan. Just like with Apple Black, it's very much just a fantastic example of the kind of storytelling that the manga industry is opened up to when more diverse creators are added to the mix. The story of Radiant is ongoing, and it updates one full printed volume at a time. I'm currently completely up to date with the book releases, so now I'm just stuck eagerly awaiting the next one, which I don't think is coming out until a few months from now. So yeah, in the midst of all of that waiting, it was quite nice to have a flick through some of the older volumes while finding references for this drawing. For the pose and prop, I decided to draw my character here standing around with one of the flying brooms that feature in the series. Radiant has a lot of really interesting item designs in it. A lot of the magical stuff is powered by these magic feathers, and the brooms come in all shapes and sizes. Some are configured to look like bikes, some fold in half like scooters. I already tortured myself enough trying to draw that guitar earlier though, so I figured I'd take it easy this time and just draw a basic, normal kind of broom for this one. The sketch wasn't too hard to do since I felt like the style of anatomy in Radiant was actually already pretty close to the way that I do anatomy in my own work anyway, but because it felt so similar, I made sure to pay extra attention to the areas where I did notice any differences. The main bits I picked up on were in the shape of the face, the pointiness of the chin, and the musculature of the arms and elbows. But since the costume here includes a big baggy cardigan, that last one actually didn't end up being something I could really translate anyway, so forget about that one. The other main area of difference was, of course, in the facial features. I used the main character of Radiant as my main point of reference for both the face and hair on this one. The only main bit I had to adapt being that I left the hair blank rather than filling it in with solid black, so that instead I could fill it with a grey screen tone later on. As with most of these art styles though, a lot of the most recognisable parts of it do indeed lie in the face itself. In Radiant's case, for a character like this anyway, that means crosshatch details on the eyes and nose and thicker eyebrows. One other design feature that I tried to replicate was when I was drawing the shoes. A lot of the time the characters in Radiant have either very wide-edged fantasy-style boots, or shoes with this very particular kind of angled cuff on the top. I don't know the name of the style, but I know it looks nice and it adds to the overall Radiant aesthetic, so I tried to change the appearance of the boots in this costume design to have those kind of cuffs on top as well. As far as I can tell from Tony's Instagram, he does the main bulk of the artwork for Radiant traditionally with pen and paper, and then uses Clip Studio to apply screen tones and do the colouring for any cover pages that might need it. His ink work is really clean and confident and just lovely to look at, but because it's done traditionally, it does still have a nice little bit of variation when it comes to the line weight. As with all the other drawings today, I adjusted my pen pressure settings to match and cracked on with it to the best of my ability. I know I said as much in my actual video about Clip Studio, but the pen tool in this program is so nice to ink with because it really does make it feel like the same kind of ink flow you'd get while drawing on paper. I was really glad I got the chance to get so much practice in with it while working on all of these because I'd love to use it more in the future. Overall, I think this one turned out pretty good. In fact, I'm actually pretty happy with all of the styles I tried out today. I'd also absolutely recommend giving an exercise like this a go yourself because it's really helpful for training your brain to pick up on different design elements and implement them in your own work. And it's also just a really fun way of flexing the artistic muscles that you maybe don't normally use. For now though, why don't we put all of my recommending to one side and take a look at the finished artworks. that is that. Another art style challenge complete. Do let me know in the comments what you thought of this one, whether any of your favourite series popped up, or indeed if any of these recommendations helped you to find a new series to read. If you have any suggestions for future videos, whether you'd like to see more challenges like this, or maybe something else entirely, do feel free to pop your ideas down in the comments as well. For now anyway, thank you very much for tuning into this video. I hope you had a good time, and I hope you're all staying as safe, happy, and healthy as you possibly can. I'll see you next time.